Leisa, I appreciate you making the time to join us on the podcast today.
It is really exciting to be here with you, Jeff.
And you're coming to us from the middle of a heat wave, I understand. So you're going to have to hopefully keep the temperature down in there.
Unfortunately, the Midwest is getting one last blast of summer before fall arrives officially and in the temps on Thursday. So we're looking forward to some closer to fall temps later this week.
That's hopefully.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I've begun starting all of my podcasts with the same question, which I always find interesting, which is most of us did not grow up dreaming of being bankers as children, and yet here we are. So tell me a little bit about the path that led you to this career, because I feel like it's not where any of us kind of intended to go, and yet we all ended up here. And I usually find the story quite as interesting.
Well, as I thought about, and especially in our pre-conversation, and thought about what we would talk about today, I guess I'll just go ahead and say that I have now reached the 39th year of my career, and it has been in lending from virtually day one, which is shocking considering, I grew up on a dairy farm in the Midwest and didn't see this as where I would go. But I think it's that first job out of college thing, and that, some early advice in my career that, take every opportunity to learn something new. And every time you're given a chance to embrace something that's possibly even a little out of your comfort zone or larger than what you thought you could do, you might surprise yourself. And so that has proven very true in my career. And lending has been an area that has really taught me a lot and given me an opportunity to work for some great people and some great institutions.
Well, yeah, you stole like my first closing question, which is best piece of career advice. And that's actually the advice I give people is always look for a job that feels a little outside your comfort zone. One that you go, I can't quite believe they're giving this to me. I don't quite feel like ready for it, but I feel like maybe I could figure it out. And that's like that little edge where you're learning and growing as well as being productive. And I feel like that's particularly early in your career, the sweet spot you really have to find.
And Jeff, don't you think that it's also the finding the right leaders who really bring that out in you?
Oh.
I think back on several really good leaders, but a couple in particular that, told me what they thought I could do. And I was like, in my head, I never said it out loud, but in my head, I thought, you are crazy. That's not something I've ever aspired to, but thankfully I took their advice and walked through into some opportunities, and I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, so great managers, great leaders really do that. They help you, kind of like a great coach. They help you see maybe even more clearly than you do. They see what you can do and can become, and they push you to reach for that. And I
totally agree.
That's great. So tell me about that first job. You say that first job out of college sets you on the career path. You've been in lending for 39 years. It's a lot of experience in lending, but I think there's interesting stories to where you guys started. So what was your experience first job out of college in lending?
So my first job out of college was actually, I was hired to be the, this is my first job after I have a degree in business. I'm hired to be someone's administrative assistant. And that was not necessarily humbling, but just, every recent college grad needs to learn that, you're going to have to pay your dues. You may have paid your dues in classes, but you're going to have to pay your dues and learn the real world. So anyway, that grew into an opportunity it was for a consumer finance company that is no longer around, but they were a national company, and it grew into an opportunity to be the first female branch manager for that finance company in the South, Memphis. And, there were...
That must have been an interesting experience. I mean, you think about 39 years being a lot of experience, but you also, it's hard to think back, but I imagine there weren't a lot of women in finance, women in managing branches. It was pretty groundbreaking back then to be in that space. I imagine you were kind of the first in, and it had to be a different kind of environment than what we see today.
Yeah, it was... there were several men who were several decades older than me. And so not only was I probably the ignorant recent college grad to them, but they sort of snickered behind the scenes that, let's see her go out and make her first collection call and knock on some doors to collect loans. And, I would, at the time, those were dues that were kind of challenging at times. But I look back on it, there's a lot of roles in lending where you're siloed. You either do the origination of the loan, or you do the closing of the loan, or you do the servicing of the loan. And that job gave me the opportunity to learn everything from, calling on the dealers to finance their $500 security doors, to, booking the contract, to calling the customer if they didn't pay, to knocking on their door if they didn't pay. So yeah, it was a really unique opportunity.
That sounds fast. Knocking on the door for people who don't pay. Do we even do that anymore? I feel like there's phone calls and skip tracing, but I don't think we still send people out to collect. That's a fascinating beginning.
Yeah, I think probably insurance liability doesn't allow that anymore. So, but yeah, I think you and I talked in an earlier conversation about one of my best stories from the collection scene was going out to a mobile home and knocking on the door and coming in, and then arriving back at the office, realizing that I had fleas on my shoes and in my dress pants. And so that was not the most fun collection story. So
No, but it's one you don't forget. And they talk about a business with fleas in it, but I don't think they usually mean literal literal
that's right.
fleas in the business.
That's right.
But certainly paid your dues. I'd love to jump a little bit more to the current day. You've got a wide ranging portfolio in terms of lending products that you look after. Where do you see the opportunities? And I'm curious how you think about opportunities in this moment, because it is a moment when I see, particularly for more conservative financial institutions, a little retrenchment, a little pulling back. The macro environment is uncertain, is probably putting it kindly, in terms of how most people feel like that we're in for a risk environment. And yet I think often that's a moment when there's an opportunity to go out and get ahead of the curve. Where do you see, how do you think about this moment? And are there places you see opportunity that you think is worth investing in?
Well, it's not going to be a unique opinion, and so I wouldn't claim for that to be, but just the opportunity for a traditional, relatively conservative bank. There's many of us out there right now, to look to someone that has some fintech experience, the expertise to build a stellar customer experience. In my years in banking, um, we tend to think that we need to engineer a technology to fit our existing process, instead of realizing that you're going to have to evolve your process if you truly want to evolve your delivery of the product, your delivery of the stellar customer experience. And frankly, the Amazons of the world and those type of companies have forced us to face the fact that it's table stakes for customers, and we can either, find ways to partner and learn from each other, possibly, or we can get left in the dust by those that are innovating. And that's where I see opportunity for many of us in a more traditional bank.
I love that advice in that perspective, because I think so often we get caught up in the new technology and layering it. Like I even hate the phrase digital transformation, because I feel like it's like everybody wants a digital experience. And I go, well, if you don't start with the process question and you just go, well, how do I make the thing I've got digital? Then you don't really do that. You don't get to the right answer. And I think your point about starting with what's the customer experience? How do I, rethink my processes in the context of technologies to deliver the best experience is really, it's not how most institutions think about development. And yet it's the only real way to build the right experience. So I think it's just spot on advice for how you have to approach that. I'm curious, do you have examples where you're doing that, or things you've seen where that's worked and you've seen it execute? Because I think it's also easy to say and harder to do sometimes in terms of execution. I would love to hear your stories there, because I think it's such great perspective on how you have to approach this question.
Well, Jeff, honestly, the question drives me back to some hard lessons that I've learned personally, and then companies I've worked for have learned where, exactly the wrong way to do it has been the approach. Well, this doesn't fit our old process, so we're going to have to customize this whatever to fit our old process. And so I hope that those of us who have stumbled over that rock several times are, reminding folks, I will not say that I always succeed at that, and I probably should speak up more. But I think I'm answering your question, but I would just say that we challenge each other with that thought, a lot, and we don't always succeed. It's hard. I work for an institution now and have worked for institutions in the past who have, more than 100 years of experience in serving their communities and their stockholders. And that's worthy of a great deal of respect. However, the customers we serve are evolving, and we have to assume that we don't know everything. And so to think that we have the perfect process and we'll just fit it into a new way to deliver the product is probably going to be a recipe for some big headaches.
How do you think about working? I mean, one of the challenges I think that's a bit unique to financial institutions is the number of groups, committees, individuals who get involved in, let's say, refining. There's a credit committee and a regulatory compliance team and a risk committee that's often separate than the credit committee. And sometimes that process or that slowdown in the rethink happens from not the product owner, but the other stakeholders that have to be brought along on the journey. And I'm wondering if there are lessons you've learned about how to do that effectively to bring those other stakeholders along, and the idea of, hey, maybe we need to change how we think about a credit policy or a process that we have that could be improved. Not the old process isn't going to work, but we can accomplish the same goals. Because I feel like that's often the challenge isn't someone in the bank having a great idea, but it's how do I get all the people who can say no or slow down that innovation from happening, and how do you help navigate that and bring those stakeholders along so that they're helping you accomplish that goal as opposed to standing in the way?
So I think what I've learned about it, and I'm still learning, is that I probably early in my career, I thought that I had to be the top dog to drive that change, that I needed to be, and it's not that I aspired to that, but I thought, well, apparently I'm going to have to be the, CEO or chief credit officer or whoever that is to drive this. And what I've learned is what honestly leaders challenged me with over the years. And I think it's proven true. And that is, no, you need to learn how to influence and gain credibility. And you gain credibility by, it's the hard work of showing that you're willing to get in the trenches with others and work side by side with them, to learn the lessons together. It's not necessarily about being the person who has the role at the top of the org chart. It's even more impressive if you can influence those around you who maybe even are higher rank in the organization, but the success of gaining the credibility, and some of it is, frankly, having some years where you have worked in the industry and you have something to say and you express it in a respectful way, valuing the experience that they bring to the table, but also using your influence management skills. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it's probably the fastest way to begin to try to drive change is to gain credibility and use your influence.
Your point is so interesting to me, because so often people think that, particularly junior employees, like, well, this, like, if you're senior enough, then you just say it and it happens. And it turns out that even the CEO can say, we should do X. And that does not mean that in an institution that's got lots of groups, that's just going to become the way things are done. Well, I know he said that, but this is the way we do things, and this is the process, and it doesn't fit in stuff blocks. So even if you think you can become the CEO and magically just, snap your fingers and everything will change, it doesn't work that way. It is about building influence and understanding the point of view and bringing people along to understand how something can be made to work. So it's a lesson I've learned. I think everybody maybe sees it now a little bit more in politics, where the president doesn't you can be president of the United States. It doesn't mean what you want just becomes the way things happen. There's
And
still a process of getting people involved and on board and influencing.
yeah, that's a great analogy, the president of the United States, and I do have a great deal of empathy for CEOs and chief credit officers and chief product officers and those roles that honestly, if they haven't cast a vision that's brought people in to have confidence in them, people will, nod and say yes and then go back and do the thing that they originally thought was the right thing to do anyway. So
Yeah, it's institutions have their own momentum, and it's not like a car that you're holding the steering wheel of. It's a much more nuanced experience
yeah.
to manage, and that influence and understanding what's going on and the other person's side and the other person and their half of the business, and how you influence, I think, is critical. I also want to talk about a little bit. You've done some interesting things in the mortgage space of late that you mentioned to me, and I'd love to understand a little bit what those are, because I think it's near and dear to our heart how you kind of innovate into products that can help people who maybe aren't being helped by current products. Would love to hear what you guys have been doing in that space.
So we have had a great deal of success at our institution and at other institutions I've worked at with lending to wealthy clients and customizing products for them. And so that's an important space. It's an important customer base in the bank, but we hadn't done as well with more underserved communities. And so very much a team effort. I do not own the credit for this, but we are extremely pleased that we've rolled out a down payment assistance program that, to give credit where credit is due. Our chief credit officer said, we want to be industry leading. Our CEO said, we want to be the best at this. And so we have last fall launched a down payment assistance program that provides both, with under certain criteria for borrowers that meet the qualifications of the program, whether it be income wise or where they are purchasing the property, et cetera. We provide either a grant or a down payment assistance towards closing costs, or both. And it is not considered forgivable. It is forgiven at the moment it is granted, in hopes of investing not only in our communities, but in and when I say our communities, the communities where we have branch locations that we serve, but also the individuals in those communities who, frankly, not a secret to anyone that knows anything about lending, housing prices have been very unreasonable and out of reach, not even to begin to speak to the lack of inventory in the affordable home space. So we felt like it was our responsibility as an institution to step into that need, and we're very proud of what we've done there. It absolutely was a team effort. It absolutely involved real give and take with credit, with our compliance folks, our community and fair banking resources. So if I thought about it, Jeff, I'd have the numbers right on top of my head, but we've had an impressive number of applications, and we've reached some good milestones in the success in that program. We're very excited about programs like that and how they might help us do a better job of serving all of the individuals in our communities.
Yeah, I love that, because one of the ironies of lending is that often the people who least need credit have the most access to it, right? It's kind of like in venture capital, when you got a business, like if you need money, it's hard to get. And as soon as you don't need money, everybody wants to give it to you.
Absolutely.
You go, well, we're profitable now. We don't need your money. No, take some more money. I don't want any more money. So, that sense of how do we get money to not just those who have a need, a well-to-do person buying a home, but those who don't have easy access to it, I think is such a critical part. And it always warms my heart, because I think as someone who came to banking from the outside, I don't think I appreciated how much most bankers are really focused on truly serving the consumers in their community, the people who are left out. It's not always easy to do at an institutional level to get people comfortable with the risk and the credit quality and what's going on from that perspective. But I do think most people are in it for the right reason. Say, how do we help the people who need help, get credit to people who need it and who deserve it, but maybe are not typically seen that way.
Agree, agree. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it because it really is, you and I were talking earlier about influence management. I mean, this was not one person driving this initiative. It was multiple people who came together and tried to think differently about how we do lending. The easiest thing in the world is to maintain our pristine balance sheet and, avoid credit losses and find the most, as you said, often the borrowers who have the most assets and are the least risky for the bank. It's harder to step outside and say, how can we really change how we do this to serve a different community? So it's great to have an opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, I love it. Is there anything else I should have asked you? I mean, believe it or not, we've blown through our 20 minutes. I didn't even feel like that. But is there anything else before I hit you with my lightning round questions that you wanted to talk about, or things you think we missed today?
No, you are a master at making the time fly by. I had no idea that much time had gone by as well. So, as usual, you've made it painless. I appreciate it.
Hopefully painful wasn't on the menu, but I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the conversation. So I've got 3 questions I ask everybody at the end of the podcast. And there's some great insights. You've already sort of answered one, but I'm going to make you give me a different answer, which is what's the best piece of career advice you've ever gotten? So you kind of started off with that, but I'm going to make you give me a different piece here. So we get 2 for this episode.
I've talked about career advice that I received from mentors and leaders, but I can't forget my dad and the example he set. Both of my parents provided incredible opportunities for me, both through education and just, the leadership that they showed in my early years. But so I hope that this is okay. But my dad was a dairy farmer, and he did not have a fancy operation. He and his brother milked 100 cows a day, and they did it, bending down, and they did have milking machines, but it wasn't a fancy operation. Anyway, the advice he gave myself and my siblings was always, just remember, no matter how glamorous the opportunity looks, there's always muddy udders to wash, no matter where you work. And
always muddy udders to wash. That is a unique piece of advice.
Cows walk around in mud, and you have to clean them up before you. And so the message there and why it's important is, you have to be willing to do the hard work to succeed. And there's a lot of work behind the scenes that is not glamorous or attractive, but it's required to qualify you to succeed in the more glamorous aspects and the more financially rewarding aspects. So that's why it was important advice.
I think it's fantastic advice. I love ones with like sayings like this that I can remember. There's always muddy udders.
I'm not sure how many people you'll tell that one to, Jeff.
Well, at least everybody listens to the podcast is going to hear it. But I actually give that exact advice to my kids when they see certain aspects of your career or whatever that look like fun, or they see, one of my kids is really into tennis right now, and he sees people winning tournaments. Like, it's not all going out and winning a tournament, right? It's like, there's hard work and there's parts of that are not fun. And you've got to be willing to do both to earn the right. And so I think that message is really critical, that people understand that like every job has its unglamorous side. And if you're not willing to do that part, you're not going to get to do the fun parts.
So true.
So I love it. I will use that. I will definitely be sharing that with my children over the dinner table tonight. All right. That's a great first one. So the second one is, what's the best piece of advice you've gotten about the lending industry? And you've got, some experience here. So what's the best advice you've heard about, getting into or operating in the lending space?
Where my mind goes on that one is back right before the Great Recession, mid 2000s. I worked for a company that was acquired by another, and began to see some really what I would describe very kindly as creative mortgage lending. And, some of the things that many of us in the industry knew about, the interest only option arms and the underwriting standards where, it was joked that if you could show that you could breathe by holding a mirror up in front, you got a mortgage. Everyone got a mortgage. Anyway, I think it just goes back to, if you can't understand it and it doesn't make sense, you need to approach with caution, because, it appeared then that home values go up and up and up, and this is going to be okay because they always go up. They don't always go up. And, it's a very basic lesson in lending. Pay attention to the things that you don't understand because they could be something that could trip you up later.
I like that. And there's definitely examples in not that distant history when you can look at them in retrospect and go, how did that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't know, but it was approved.
exactly.
And putting a critical eye, I think, is a great piece of advice for everybody to follow. All right, last question. What's one bold prediction for the future?
I don't think I'm always known as an optimist, but I can always be an optimist that we're going to figure out this economic cycle, just like we figured out all the ones before us that seemed really, really baffling. I have a lot of hope in our financial system that we can learn lessons from our past mistakes. We can evolve. And so we didn't see 2020 coming. We didn't see, all of our predictions were wrong because of a pandemic, but we survived. And I think that whatever's ahead of us that brings, angst, whether it be the political environment or the regulatory environment, I am convinced that we will survive, that we will evolve, and that we can be better because of the adversity that we have to go through to get there.
Oh, I like that. It's a nice uplifting way to end the podcast. So I appreciate your time, Leisa. This was really fun. I think a lot of interesting insights and a piece of career advice I will not forget. Muddy udders that need washing everywhere. I appreciate you making the time and sharing your perspectives with the audience.
Thank you, Jeff.